The SEALs had stopped counting the dead 3 hours ago. Senior Chief Marcus Washington pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall as another RPG shrieked overhead, showering his position with dust and the acrid smell of high explosives. 17 men had walked into this Syrian hellhole. 8 remained, and somewhere in the darkness beyond their failing perimeter, Viktor Reznik was smiling. Marcus knew that smile. He had seen it in classified briefings, in grainy satellite photographs, in the nightmares that had plagued him since the day they lost Ghost. Before we dive into this story of impossible survival and brotherhood, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who served, who carried their team when everything went wrong. Petty Officer Santana slid into position beside him, rifle up, scanning the shadows between collapsed industrial towers. The younger man was breathing too fast, his movements sharp with barely controlled panic. 3 years ago, Diego Santana had been the cockiest sniper in naval special warfare. Tonight, he looked like what he was, a man fighting in a tomb. "Where's Frost?" Marcus demanded. "East building. Riot took shrapnel. Frost is keeping him stable, but we cannot move him far." Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. Jinsu Park was 27 years old. He had a mother in Sacramento who still sent care packages filled with homemade rice cakes. The thought of explaining to that woman how her son died in an abandoned oil facility that did not exist on any official map made something twist in Marcus's chest. Another explosion. Closer this time. The Russians were tightening the noose with patient, professional precision. Viktor Reznik had earned his reputation hunting NATO special operations teams across 3 continents. He did not make mistakes. He did not leave survivors. "Senior Chief." Lindgren's voice crackled through the radio, steady as ever despite everything. "Riot is stable. Requesting orders." Marcus looked at Santana. The younger man's hands had started shaking. Not from fear, Marcus knew. From something worse. From memory. From the weight of a ghost that had never stopped haunting him. "You holding together?" Marcus asked quietly. Santana's jaw tightened. "I'm fine, Senior Chief." He was not fine. None of them were fine. But they were SEALs, and SEALs did not break. They bent. They adapted. They survived. At least that was what the training promised. The training had never accounted for Viktor Reznik. A burst of automatic fire stitched across the wall above them, forcing both men flat against the debris-strewn floor. Marcus tasted blood where he had bitten his tongue. When the firing paused, he risked a glance around the corner and immediately pulled back. Muzzle flashes in at least 6 positions. They were surrounded. "We need to move," Santana hissed. "Move where?" "There is nowhere left." The radio crackled again. This time the voice was not Lindgren. This time the voice made Marcus's blood turn to ice. "Good evening, Senior Chief Washington." The accent was thick, cultured, almost pleasant. "I have been waiting a very long time for this meeting." Marcus keyed his radio. "Reznik, you know my name. I am flattered. I know yours as well, of course. I know all of you. I have studied your team for 3 years. Ever since that unfortunate business in Aleppo. You remember Aleppo, do you not?" Marcus remembered. He remembered fire and smoke and the sound of a woman's voice on the radio, steady even as the building collapsed around her. He remembered Frost's face when he came back without her. He remembered the memorial service where they buried an empty coffin. "I remember," Marcus said. "Then you remember her. Your ghost. Such a poetic name for such a lethal woman. She killed my brother, Senior Chief. Did you know that? 2 years before Aleppo. A single shot from 800 meters in a sandstorm. Impossible, they told me. No one could make that shot. But she did." Santana had gone completely still beside Marcus. His hands were no longer shaking. They had curled in a fist so tight his knuckles had turned white. "She was the best," Marcus said. He did not know why he was still talking, why he was giving this monster anything. Maybe because the alternative was silence, and silence meant listening to his men die. Reznik laughed softly. "She was extraordinary, and now she is dead, just like it will be dead before sunrise. But I want you to understand something, Washington. I want you to die knowing that everything that happens tonight, everything that happened 3 years ago, It was all connected. Your ghost did not die in a random operation. She was sacrificed, and the same people who killed her sent you here to join her. The radio went dead. Marcus looked at Santana. The younger man's eyes had changed. The panic was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. He is lying, Santana said. It was not a question. Marcus touched the dog tags hanging beneath his body armor. 2 sets, his own and hers. He had worn them for 3 years. He had promised himself he would wear them until the day he could put them on her grave with his own hands. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. 3 years since Syria. 3 years since the woman who taught them all what it meant to be SEALs vanished in a column of fire and smoke. 3 years of believing she would somehow walk back through those compound gates. She never did. 3 years earlier, the extraction helicopter had been 90 seconds out when the building started to collapse. Marcus remembered every detail of that night with the cruel clarity that only trauma could provide. The way the dust cloud had swallowed the street. The sound of Natasha Volkov's voice on the radio, calm as a Sunday morning even as her world fell apart around her. "Preacher, I need you to listen to me." Her voice had carried that faint accent it always did when emotions ran high. The ghost of Odessa that she could never quite shake. "I count 15 hostiles between your position and the bird. You are not getting through without cover. We are not leaving you," Marcus had shouted into his radio. "Frost, give me a status on Ghost." Evan Lindgren's response had been immediate. She took 2 rounds to the vest, pulling Santana clear. "She is mobile, but she is not fast. I can get to her in 40 seconds. "Negative." Natasha's voice had cut through like a blade. "Frost, you stay with the team. Lobo is hit, and he needs you more than I do. I have got a position in the east stairwell. Good sight lines. I can hold them long enough for extraction." Marcus had known what she was really saying. He had known, and he had been powerless to stop it. "Natasha, do not do this. 20 years, preacher. That is how long I have been fighting. First with my father in places that did not have names. Then with you. With all of you." She had paused, and when she spoke again her voice had cracked just slightly. "You are my family. The only real family I have ever had. Let me do this for my family." The RPG had hit the stairwell 6 seconds later. The explosion had blown out 3 floors of the already unstable structure. Marcus had screamed her name until his throat bled while Frost dragged him toward the helicopter. The last thing he saw before the bird lifted off was the building folding in on itself like a house of cards, burying everything beneath a mountain of concrete and flame. Frost had gone back. Regulations be damned. The medic had fast-stroked back down the moment they reached a safe hover distance. He had searched for 30 minutes, while Marcus kept the helicopter circling despite the pilot's increasingly desperate warnings about fuel. When Frost finally called for extraction, his voice had been empty. "I found her tags," he had said. "Just her tags. There is nothing left, Senior Chief. She is gone." But standing in the ruins of a Syrian oil facility 3 years later, Marcus was no longer certain that Frost had told him the complete truth. Something in the way the medic avoided his eyes during the memorial. Something in the way Frost had requested transfer to a different team only to withdraw the request 24 hours later. Something had never added up. Another explosion rocked the building, dragging Marcus back to the present. Santana was staring at him with an expression that bordered on desperation. "Senior Chief, we need a plan. Resnick is playing with us, but he will not play forever." Marcus forced himself to focus. 8 men, limited ammunition. No extraction coming because no one knew they were in trouble. The mission had been classified so deep that their own command structure thought they were on a training exercise in Jordan. If they died here, the official story would be a helicopter accident. Clean, deniable, exactly like Aleppo. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. Exactly like Aleppo. "Frost, get on the emergency channel." Marcus keyed his radio as he spoke. "Something is wrong with this entire operation. We were set up. Senior Chief, the emergency channel requires authentication codes that will take at least 6 minutes to. We do not have 6 minutes. Just do it." A burst of gunfire erupted from the east building, followed by Lindgren's terse voice. Contact east. For hostiles trying to breach. Riot is returning fire, but we cannot hold this position much longer. Marcus made a decision. Santana, you are with me. We're pushing to the east building. We consolidate, we fortify, and we figure out how to get a message out. And if Resnick cuts us off, then we make him pay for every inch. They moved through the darkness like the predators they had been trained to be. Despite everything, despite the fear and the exhaustion and the ghost of a woman who should have been fighting beside them, they were still SEALs. They had been forged in the coldest water and the hottest fire. They did not quit. The east building was a skeletal ruin of rusted pipes and collapsed catwalks. Frost had established a defensive position behind a row of corroded storage tanks. His medical kit opened beside a pale-faced Jean Sue Park. Riot managed a weak smile when he saw Marcus. Senior Chief. The young communications specialist's voice was strained but steady. I have been trying to raise anyone on the emergency frequencies. All I'm getting is static. Someone is jamming us. Jamming requires equipment. Equipment requires a location. Can you triangulate? Already working on it. Riot winced as Frost adjusted a bandage on his thigh. Give me 20 minutes and I can find their jammer. Take out the jammer and I can get us aligned to anyone with ears. Marcus nodded. 20 minutes. We hold for 20 minutes. From somewhere in the darkness outside, Resnick's voice echoed across the facility, amplified by speakers that turned his words into a pronouncement from an angry god. She died screaming, Washington. She called for you, and you left her. Marcus felt Santana stiffen beside him. The younger man's hands had started shaking again. He's trying to break us, Marcus said quietly. Do not let him. But Frost was staring at the ground, his face carved from stone. And when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Senior Chief, there is something I never told you about that night. Something I should have said 3 years ago. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Marcus turned slowly to face his medic, and what he saw in Lindgren's eyes made his blood run cold. I never found a body, Frost said. I counted 30 seconds, and we had to go. But in those 30 seconds, before the dust settled completely, I saw something. Movement, just for a second. And I have spent 3 years trying to convince myself I imagined it. Marcus grabbed Frost by the front of his tactical vest and slammed him against the corroded storage tank. The sound echoed through the ruined building like a gunshot, and for a moment, even the distant firefight seemed to pause. You saw movement, and you said nothing. 3 years, Frost. 3 years I wore her tags. 3 years I visited an empty grave. And you knew she might be alive. Frost did not resist. His eyes held the hollow look of a man who had already condemned himself 1,000 times over. I did not know anything, Senior Chief. I saw something that could have been a shadow. Could have been debris shifting. Could have been my own desperate hope playing tricks on me. And by the time the dust cleared enough to see properly, Command was screaming in my ear that we had hostiles inbound, and extraction was leaving with or without us. You should have told me. And what would you have done? Frost's voice cracked. You would have gone back. You would have died in that rubble looking for a ghost. I made a choice, Marcus. I chose to save the men I knew were alive over the woman I thought might be dead. I have hated myself for it every single day since. Santana stepped between them, his hand on Marcus's arm. Senior Chief, we do not have time for this. If there is even a chance she survived, we need to survive long enough to find out. The words cut through Marcus's rage like cold water. He released Frost and stepped back, his chest heaving. The medic slumped against the tank, looking more broken than Marcus had ever seen him. Riot's voice broke the tension. I've got something. The jamming signal is originating from the northwest quadrant. Looks like a mobile unit, probably vehicle-mounted. If we can take it out, I can broadcast on emergency frequencies. How far? Marcus demanded. Maybe 300 meters. But Resnick has at least 2 fire teams between us and that position. We would need a miracle to get through. Or a distraction. Santana was checking his rifle, his movements mechanical but precise. I could draw their attention to the south. Make them think we are attempting a breakout. You push northwest with a small team and hit the jammer. That is suicide, Frost said quietly. Maybe. Santana looked up, and there was something in his eyes that Marcus had not seen since Aleppo. A fierce, almost reckless determination. But it is what Ghost would have done. She taught me that sometimes you have to put yourself in the crosshairs to give your team a chance. Before Marcus could respond, the building shook with another explosion. This one was closer, strong enough to send dust cascading from the skeletal framework above them. Resnick was done waiting. "They are breaching," Riot reported, his fingers flying over his equipment despite his wounds. "Multiple entry points. We have maybe 5 minutes before they are on top of us." Marcus made his decision. "Santana, you're not going alone. Frost, you are with him. Keep him alive. Riot, can you move?" The young communications specialist gritted his teeth and pushed himself to his feet. His face went white with pain, but he stayed upright. "I can move, Senior Chief." "Then you are with me. We hit that jammer, and we call in every favor we have ever earned." They split into 2 teams and moved out through different exits. Marcus tried not to think about the fact that he might be sending Santana and Frost to their deaths. He tried not to think about Frost's confession, about 3 years of grief that might have been built on a lie. He focused on the mission because the mission was all that could save them now. The northwest approach was a nightmare of collapsed structures and exposed sight lines. Marcus moved from cover to cover with Riot limping beside him, every shadow a potential threat. Twice they had to freeze as Russian voices passed within meters of their position. Resnick's men were professionals, but they were searching for a retreating enemy, not a team pushing deeper into the trap. The jammer was exactly where Riot had predicted. A military-grade vehicle bristling with antenna arrays, guarded by 4 men who looked bored with their assignment. They were not expecting trouble from this direction. Marcus lined up a shot. 300 meters of darkness, exhaustion weighing on his arms, his heart pounding loud enough to throw off his aim. He thought of Natasha, of the way she used to breathe before a shot. Slow and steady, like she had all the time in the world. He squeezed the trigger. The first guard dropped. The second spun toward the sound and took Riot's round through the chest. The remaining 2 scrambled for cover, but they were too slow, too surprised. 8 seconds later, silence. Riot was already moving toward the vehicle, his wounded leg dragging, but his hands steady on his equipment. He ripped open an access panel and started working. 30 seconds, Senior Chief. Maybe less. Marcus covered him, scanning the darkness for any sign of response to their attack. The gunfire from the south told him Santana and Frost were still fighting, still drawing attention. He prayed it would be enough. Riot let out a triumphant sound. "Jammer is down. Broadcasting now on all emergency frequencies. This is SEAL Team Bravo requesting immediate extraction from grid coordinates." The radio crackled. For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice responded, faint but clear. "Bravo, this is Overlord. We read you. Extraction assets are 60 minutes out. Can you hold?" 60 minutes. An eternity in combat. Marcus was about to respond when another sound cut through the night. A rifle shot from somewhere far to the east. A single, impossibly distant crack that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And then one of Resnick's men, a soldier Marcus had not even seen approaching their position, crumpled to the ground with a hole precisely between his eyes. Marcus stared at the body. That shot had come from at least 2 kilometers away. In darkness, through crosswinds, he could feel tugging at his own gear. He knew only one person in the world who could make that shot. Riot was staring at him with wide eyes. "Senior Chief, that grouping, that distance, that is not possible." Marcus touched the dog tags beneath his armor. His hands were shaking, as if you're a ghost. A second shot split the darkness. Another body fell. This one a sniper who had been setting up position on an elevated catwalk 300 meters to the north. Marcus watched the man tumble from his perch and felt something cold run down his spine. The shooting pattern was unmistakable. 2 rounds, 2 kills, both in locations that should have been invisible to any observer outside the facility. Riot grabbed his arm. "Senior Chief, I am picking up a transmission on our old team frequency. The one we stopped using after Aleppo. Put it through." Static hissed for a moment. Then a voice came through, faint and distorted but achingly familiar. "Preacher, you still owe me $20. Marcus stopped breathing. The world seemed to contract to a single point, a single impossible moment that defied everything he had believed for 3 years. That voice, that accent, that dry humor in the face of death. "Ghost." The word came out as a whisper. "Natasha, miss me?" Another shot echoed across the facility, and somewhere in the darkness a man screamed. "I would love to catch up, but you have about 15 hostiles converging on your position from the east. Recommend you relocate to the processing building, southwest corner. I will cover your movement." Marcus did not hesitate. He grabbed Riot and they ran, trusting the ghost in the darkness to keep them alive. Bullets cracked past them, close enough to feel the heat, but each time a Russian shooter lined up a kill shot, he went down before he could pull the trigger. By the time they reached the processing building, Marcus had counted 7 more bodies. Frost's voice burst through the radio. "Senior Chief, what is happening? Someone is picking off hostiles all around us. Santana thinks he is losing his mind." "He is not losing his mind." Marcus leaned against a rust-eaten support beam, his chest heaving. "She is alive, Frost. Ghost is alive." The silence on the radio stretched for an eternity. When Frost spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "That is not possible. I saw the building come down. Nobody could have survived that." And yet, Marcus looked out into the darkness where death was still falling from the sky, one precise shot at a time. "Get to our position. Southwest corner of the processing building. And Frost, when you see her, you can apologize in person." 2 kilometers away, on a rocky outcropping that offered a clear view of the entire facility, Natasha Volkov lined up her neck shot. She was thinner than she had been 3 years ago. Harder. The scars on her arms told stories she would never share, and her eyes held shadows that had not existed before Aleppo. But her hands were steady. They were always steady. She watched her brothers moving through the compound and felt something crack open inside her chest. 3 years. 3 years of hunting Viktor Reznik across 4 continents. 3 years of living in the spaces between nations, a woman without a country or a name. 3 years of believing that everyone she loved was dead because that was what the reports had said. SEAL Team Bravo, killed in a training accident. No survivors. She had mourned them. In a safe house in Moldova, surrounded by intelligence files and empty vodka bottles, she had mourned them. And then she had gotten back to work because work was all she had left. But 6 weeks ago, a rumor had reached her through the network of ghosts and spies she had built. A rumor that Reznik was planning something big, something involving a SEAL team. She had followed the threads, pulled at the loose ends, and discovered the impossible truth. Her brothers were alive. They had always been alive. Someone had lied to her. Someone had made her believe she was alone in the world. And that same someone had now sent her family into a trap designed to destroy them all. Natasha kissed the small crucifix that hung around her neck. It had belonged to her father, the man Viktor Reznik had murdered 20 years ago in a snow-covered forest outside Kiev. She had been 14 years old, hiding in a hollowed-out tree trunk, watching through a gap in the bark as the Russian put a bullet in her father's head. 20 years of hunting, 20 years of patience. And now Reznik had made the mistake of threatening the only people she had left in the world. She keyed her radio. "Preacher, I count 8 hostiles still active in your sector. I am repositioning to provide better coverage of the northern approach. Recommend you consolidate your team and prepare for extraction." "Natasha." Marcus's voice was rough with emotion. "How are you alive? We buried you. We mourned you. It is a long story. For now, just know that I have spent 3 years gathering intelligence on something bigger than Reznik. Something that goes all the way to the top of Naval Special Warfare Command. Someone wanted me dead. Marcus. And when they found out you were still alive, they wanted you dead too." "Who?" The single word carried more weight than any speech. Natasha sighted down her scope, watching Reznik's remaining forces scrambling to regroup. They were confused now, demoralized by the invisible death that kept falling from the sky. Good. Confusion meant mistakes. Mistakes meant opportunities. I do not have a name yet, but I have evidence. Files. Recordings. Enough to bring down whoever did this. And Resnick knows where to find the final piece. Then we take him alive. Natasha smiled grimly. That was always the plan, Preacher. I just needed the right bait. The radio crackled with Frost's voice. Ghost, this is Frost. I need you to know something. 3 years ago, I saw you move. I saw you alive, and I left anyway. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Natasha closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them again, they were clear and cold. We all make choices under fire, Frost. You chose to save the team. That is exactly what I would have ordered you to do. Now stop apologizing and start shooting. We have a long night ahead of us. The team consolidated in the processing building just as Resnick's forces began to regroup. Marcus counted heads as each man slipped through the shattered doorway. Frost and Santana came in last, both breathing hard, both wearing expressions that mixed exhaustion with something that looked dangerously like hope. Santana immediately moved to a window overlooking the eastern approach. His hands are no longer shaking. They had not shaken since the first impossible shot rang out across the facility. He raised his rifle and sighted down the scope, scanning the darkness for any sign of the woman who had trained him. I cannot see her, he said quietly. I know she is out there, but I cannot find her position. That is why they call her Ghost. Marcus checked his ammunition. 2 magazines left. Maybe 60 rounds between life and death. Riot, what is our extraction status? The young communications specialist was pale but focused, his fingers working his equipment despite the blood seeping through Frost's hasty bandage work. Overlord confirms extraction assets are 53 minutes out. They are vectoring a pair of Black Hawks and a combat air patrol for cover. But Senior Chief, there is a problem. There is always a problem. Resnick has reinforcements inbound. Satellite picked up a convoy heading this direction from the east. 12 vehicles, estimated 40 to 50 additional fighters. They will be here in about 30 minutes. The math was simple and brutal. 30 minutes until overwhelming force arrived. 53 minutes until extraction. 23 minutes of hell with dwindling ammunition and a wounded man who could barely walk. Ghost, Marcus keyed his radio. Tell me you have a plan. Natasha's voice came back calm and steady. I'm working on it. But Preacher, I need you to understand something. Resnick is not here by accident. This entire operation was designed to draw me out of hiding. He has been hunting me for 3 years, ever since I started getting close to the truth about who betrayed us. What truth? My father was not just a Soviet defector. He was carrying information about moles inside Western intelligence agencies. People who had been feeding secrets to Moscow for decades. When he tried to come in from the cold, someone on our side sold him out. Resnick was the triggerman, but someone in American intelligence gave the order. Marcus felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. And you think that same person arranged Aleppo? Arranged tonight. I know they did. I have spent 3 years building a case, gathering evidence from every intelligence service that would talk to me. But there is one piece missing. One name that ties everything together. And Resnick is the only person alive who knows it. So we need him alive. We need him talking. There's a difference. From his position by the window, Santana spoke without turning around. Movement northeast. Looks like a Foreman fire team trying to flank our position. Natasha's response was immediate. I see them. Hold your fire. Lobo, let them get closer. I want Resnick to think his flanking maneuver is working. Marcus watched Santana's shoulders tense. The younger man's finger hovered near his trigger, every instinct screaming at him to engage the approaching threat. But he held. He trusted the voice in his ear, even though he had not heard it in 3 years. 15 seconds passed. 20. The fire team crept closer, moving from cover to cover with professional precision. They were within 100 meters now, close enough that Marcus could see the vapor of their breath in the cold night air. Now, Natasha said, for shots rang out in rapid succession. For bodies fell. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 seconds. Santana let out a breath he had been holding since the flanking team first appeared. She has not lost a step. She never does. Frost was checking Riot's bandages, his movements efficient despite the emotion in his eyes. When we get out of here, someone needs to explain to me how she survived that building collapse. Natasha's voice carried a hint of dark humor. Very carefully, Frost, and with a great deal of luck, the building did not collapse all at once. There was a basement level that held long enough for me to find a drainage tunnel. I crawled for 6 hours through absolute darkness with 2 broken ribs and a concussion. When I finally surfaced, I was 3 kilometers from the extraction point, and there was no one left to call. Why did you not contact us? Marcus asked the question that had been burning in his chest since the moment he heard her voice. 3 years, Natasha. 3 years we thought you were dead. The radio was silent for a long moment. When Natasha spoke again, her voice had lost its edge. Because 24 hours after I crawled out of that tunnel, I intercepted a transmission, an encrypted communication between Resnick and someone using an American military frequency. They were discussing the operation. They were discussing me. And the American voice said that if I had survived, I needed to be eliminated before I could report what I had seen. Marcus closed his eyes. Someone on our side wanted you dead. Someone with enough clearance to access our mission parameters. Someone who knew exactly where we would be and when. I spent 3 months in hiding, trying to figure out who I could trust. And then I heard about the training accident. SEAL Team Bravo, killed when their helicopter went down in Jordan. All hands lost. That was a cover story. Marcus remembered the briefing, the way command had explained that their official deaths would allow them to operate in deeper cover. We were reassigned to black operations. Off the books. I know that now, but I did not know it then. I thought you were all dead, Marcus. I thought I was the only one left. So I did what my father taught me to do. I disappeared, and I started hunting the people who destroyed my family. Another explosion rocked the building. Resnick was getting impatient. Natasha's voice hardened. Reinforcements are 12 minutes out. I am repositioning to cover the eastern road. When those vehicles arrive, I'm going to need you to create a distraction. What kind of distraction? The loud kind. Make them think you are trying to break out to the west. Draw their attention away from me. And preacher, whatever happens in the next hour, I need you to know something. I never stopped being part of this team. Even when I thought you were gone, I carried you with me. All of you. Marcus touched the dog tags beneath his armor. Her tags. He had worn them for 3 years as a memorial. Now he understood they had been a promise. We were getting out of this together, Ghost. All of us. And then you're going to tell me everything. The distraction was Santana's idea. 3 fragmentation grenades wired to a timer, placed near the western perimeter with enough explosive force to simulate a breach attempt. When they detonated, Resnick's remaining forces would converge on the blast site, expecting to find desperate SEALs making a suicidal run for freedom. Instead, they would find empty darkness and the growing realization that they were being hunted by something they could not see. Charges set. Santana slipped back through the processing building's shattered entrance, his movements as silent as the training Natasha had drilled into him years ago. 60 seconds to detonation. Marcus positioned his team near the eastern windows. From here they could see the road where Resnick's reinforcements would arrive, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the industrial wasteland. The convoy's headlights were already visible on the horizon, a chain of yellow eyes growing brighter with each passing second. Ghost, Marcus keyed his radio. Convoy is 4 minutes out. What is your position? Elevated position overlooking the eastern approach. I have clear sight lines on the road for approximately 800 meters. When those vehicles enter my kill zone, I'm going to need you to keep their infantry occupied. Copy that. Frost, how is Riot? The medic looked up from his patient. He has lost blood, but he is stable. He can shoot if he has to. Riot managed a weak grin. I can definitely shoot, Senior Chief. Just point me at something that needs holes in it. The grenades detonated with a thunderous roar that shook the entire facility. Shouts erupted from the western perimeter as Resnick's men rushed toward the explosion, exactly as Santana had predicted. For a precious few seconds, the eastern approach was virtually unguarded. Those seconds were all Natasha needed. The first vehicle in the convoy was a modified pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. Its driver never saw the round that punched through his windshield. The truck veered wildly, crashed into the vehicle behind it, and both erupted in a fireball that lit up the night sky. Natasha worked the bolt of her rifle and shifted targets. The third vehicle was trying to reverse, its driver panicking at the sudden destruction ahead. She put a round through the engine block, then another through the driver's side door. The vehicle shuddered and died, blocking the road and trapping the convoy behind it. Chaos erupted among the reinforcements. Men poured out of vehicles, seeking cover, firing blindly into the darkness at an enemy they could not locate. Natasha picked them off one by one, each shot precisely placed, each trigger pull a meditation on patience and revenge. In the processing building, Marcus watched the destruction unfold with something approaching awe. He had seen Natasha shoot before. He had watched her make impossible kills under impossible conditions. But this was something else. This was 3 years of rage and grief channeled into mechanical perfection. "She is magnificent," Santana whispered. There was no jealousy in his voice, only reverent admiration for the woman who had taught him everything he knew. But Resnick was not a fool. Even as his reinforcements burned on the eastern road, his voice crackled through the facility's speaker system. "Very impressive, Ghost. You have become even more deadly than I remembered. But you cannot kill them all. And every second you spend protecting your precious team is a second you are not hunting me." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Resnick was right. Natasha was pinned to her Overwatch position, forced to defend them instead of pursuing her real target. And somewhere in the maze of ruined buildings, the man who had murdered her father was slipping away. "Ghost, do not listen to him." Marcus keyed his radio urgently. "We stick to the plan. Extraction is 41 minutes out." Natasha's response was calm but strained. "He is moving toward the northern tunnels. If he reaches them, he will disappear. I have been hunting him for 3 years, Marcus. I cannot let him escape again. And I am not losing you again." The words came out harder than Marcus intended. "We do this together, or we do not do it at all." Silence stretched across the radio. When Natasha spoke again, her voice had softened. "You always were stubborn, preacher. I learned from the best." Another explosion rocked the eastern road as a fuel tank ignited. The reinforcement convoy was in complete disarray now, its surviving members scattered and leaderless. But the respite would not last. Resnick's original forces were already regrouping, and the western perimeter would not stay unguarded forever. Riot suddenly sat up straighter, his eyes locked on his communications equipment. "Senior Chief, I'm picking up something strange. There is another transmission on the encrypted frequency. The same one Ghost mentioned earlier. The American frequency? Yes, and it is coming from inside the facility." Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet. "That is not possible. We are the only American assets here." Riot shook his head slowly. "The signal is originating approximately 200 meters north of our position. Someone else is here, Senior Chief. Someone with access to classified American military communications." Natasha's voice cut through the confusion, sharp with sudden understanding. "The mole. It has to be the mole. They sent someone to make sure the job got finished. To make sure none of us walked out of here alive." Marcus chambered around. "Then we have 2 targets now." "No." Natasha's response was immediate. "The mole is mine. You focus on keeping the team alive. Extraction is 39 minutes out. Hold your position and trust me. Ghost, you cannot take on Resnick and a trained operative at the same time. Watch me." The radio went silent. Marcus stared into the darkness where his friend, his sister in arms, had just disappeared on a hunt that might kill her. Again, Frost moved to his side. "She survived 3 years alone in the shadows, Senior Chief. If anyone can do this, she can." Marcus touched the dog tag beneath his armor. He wanted to believe that. He needed to believe it. But the fear coiling in his chest refused to listen to reason. "All we can do now is hold the line," he said quietly, "and pray she comes back." Natasha moved through the darkness like water flowing through cracks in stone. She had abandoned her long rifle for the close quarters ahead, trading precision at distance for the brutal efficiency of her suppressed sidearm. The northern tunnels were a maze of corroded pipes and collapsed passages, remnants of the Soviet-era infrastructure that had once pumped oil from Syrian soil. She could hear Resnick ahead of her. His footsteps were careful but not silent, the movements of a man who knew he was being followed and did not care. He wanted her to follow. Everything about this night had been designed to bring her here, to this moment, to this confrontation 20 years in the making. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, some kind of maintenance hub where rusted machinery still clung to the walls. Emergency lighting flickered overhead, casting the space in shades of blood red and shadow. And there, standing in the center of the room, as if he had been waiting for her all along, was Viktor Resnick. He was older than she remembered. The years had carved deep lines into his face and threaded silver through his close-cropped hair. But his eyes were the same, cold, patient, the eyes of a predator who had never known what it meant to be prey. Natasha Volkov. His accent made her name sound like a curse. You have your father's eyes. I noticed that 20 years ago, when I watched him die, he looked at me with those same eyes, defiant until the very end. Natasha kept her weapon trained on his chest. She had dreamed of this moment for 2 decades, had imagined 1,000 different ways it might unfold. But now that it was here, she felt strangely hollow. You murdered him in cold blood. He was unarmed. He had surrendered. Resnick shrugged as if they were discussing the weather. He was a traitor to his country, a man who sold secrets to the West. In my world, such men do not deserve the dignity of a fair fight. Your world is built on lies and corpses. Perhaps, but your world is built on the same foundation, is it not? Resnick smiled, a thin expression that never reached his eyes. You think the Americans are better than us? You think they do not sacrifice their own when convenience demands it? Ask yourself, Ghost, who gave me your father's location? Who told me exactly where to find him and when? Natasha's finger tightened on the trigger. You are stalling, waiting for your men to find us. My men are occupied with your friends. And besides, I'm not the one you should be worried about. A sound behind her. Natasha spun, weapon raised, and found herself staring at a face she recognized. A face that had appeared in briefings and award ceremonies and official photographs for the past 15 years. Captain Elena Vance, Naval Intelligence, one of the most decorated officers in the history of Special Operations Support, and apparently a traitor. Hello, Natasha. Vance held a pistol in a steady, two-handed grip, aimed directly at Natasha's head. I was really hoping you would stay dead this time. Natasha's mind raced through the implications. Vance had access to everything. Mission parameters, team locations, extraction schedules. She could have been feeding information to Resnick for years without anyone suspecting. You were the voice on a radio, the American who ordered my father killed. Your father was going to expose me. Vance's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing quarterly reports. 20 years of work, 20 years of building relationships and gathering intelligence, and he was going to burn it all down with a single debriefing. I did what I had to do. You murdered him. You murdered your own asset. I eliminated a threat to national security. Vance smiled coldly, just like I'm going to eliminate you. Natasha calculated angles and distances. 2 targets, 2 weapons aimed at her. Even if she killed one, the other would have time to fire. The math was not in her favor, but math had never been her strongest subject. She moved, not toward either of her enemies, but sideways, toward the rusted machinery that lined the walls. Her first shot took Vance in the shoulder, spinning the woman around and sending her pistol clattering across the floor. Her second shot was aimed at Resnick, but the Russian was already moving, decades of combat experience propelling him behind cover before her finger finished squeezing the trigger. The chamber erupted into chaos. Bullets sparked off metal as Resnick returned fire from behind a massive gear assembly. Natasha rolled, came up shooting, forced him to keep his head down while she closed the distance. Vance was screaming, clutching her wounded shoulder, trying to crawl toward her fallen weapon. Natasha kicked the pistol away without breaking stride. Resnick, her voice echoed through the chamber. You wanted this fight. You have been hunting me for 3 years. So stop hiding and face me. Silence. Then, slowly, the Russian stepped out from behind his cover. His weapon was holstered. His hands hung loose at his sides. Your father asked me for the same thing. A fair fight. Warrior to warrior. Resnick began rolling up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and decorated with old scars. I gave him 30 seconds before I put a bullet in his brain. You have earned more than that. Natasha holstered her own weapon. The logical part of her mind screamed that this was insane, that she should simply shoot him and be done with it. But logic had nothing to do with this. This was about blood, about honor, about a debt that could only be paid in kind. She raised her fists. Then let us finish this. Resnick moved first. He was faster than a man his age had any right to be, closing the distance between them with a brutal efficiency that spoke of decades spent perfecting the art of killing with bare hands. His first strike was aimed at her throat, a blow designed to end the fight before it began. Natasha slipped the punch by millimeters and countered with an elbow to his ribs. The impact was solid, but Resnick absorbed it without flinching, wrapping his arm around hers and using her momentum to throw her into the rusted machinery behind them. Metal screamed against her back. Stars exploded across her vision. She tasted blood where she had bitten her tongue, but she had been hurt worse than this in places far darker than a Syrian tunnel, and pain had long ago stopped being a factor in her calculations. She ducked his follow-up strike and drove her knee into his thigh, targeting the nerve cluster that would deaden his leg. Resnick grunted and stumbled, giving her the opening she needed. 3 rapid strikes to his face, each one precise, each one designed to disorient and damage. But Resnick was not just any opponent. He was Spetsnaz, forged in the same crucible of violence that had shaped her father. He caught her 4th punch, twisted her wrist, and used the leverage to slam her face first into the concrete floor. Your father fought the same way. Resnick's boot pressed against the back of her neck, grinding her cheek into the dust. All technique, all precision. He never understood that sometimes victory requires savagery. Natasha's fingers found a shard of broken pipe on the floor. She drove it backward into Resnick's calf, feeling it punch through muscle and scrape against bone. The Russian howled and stumbled back, giving her time to roll away and regain her feet. They faced each other across the blood-spattered concrete, both breathing hard, both wounded, both unwilling to yield. In the distance, Natasha could hear gunfire. Her team was still fighting, still holding the line while she settled a 20-year-old debt. She thought of Marcus, of the dog tags he had worn for 3 years. She thought of Santana, of the way his hands had finally stopped shaking. She thought of Frost and Riot and every brother who had ever called her Ghost. She could not die here, not when they were so close to freedom. Resnick seemed to read her thoughts. He smiled through bloody teeth. Worried about your friends? They're running out of time. My remaining forces are converging on their position. In 10 minutes, maybe less, they will be overrun, and you will have failed them again, just like you failed your father. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Natasha felt something cold and dark rising in her chest, something she had spent 3 years trying to bury. The rage, the guilt, the knowledge that she had survived while others died. But alongside that darkness, there was something else, something her father had taught her in the years before his death. Control, he had said once, in the small apartment they shared before fleeing to America. Rage is a weapon, Natasha. But like any weapon, it must be controlled. Let it fuel you, not consume you. She took a breath. Let the rage flow through her. And then she attacked. The next 30 seconds were a blur of violence that left both combatants bleeding from a dozen wounds. Resnick was stronger, more experienced, willing to absorb punishment that would have dropped a lesser fighter. But Natasha was faster, more precise, driven by a purpose that transcended mere survival. She broke 2 of his ribs with a spinning kick. He fractured her left forearm, blocking a strike that would have crushed her skull. She opened a gash above his eye that poured blood into his vision. He dislocated her shoulder with a joint lock that sent white-hot agony screaming through her nervous system. And then, finally, she saw her opening. Resnick overextended on a lunging strike, his wounded leg betraying him at the critical moment. Natasha sidestepped, caught his arm, and used his own momentum to drive him face first into the concrete. Before he could recover, she was on his back, her good arm wrapped around his throat in a chokehold that would render him unconscious in seconds. "Yield," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Yield, and I let you live long enough to stand trial." Resnick laughed, a wet, gurgling sound that bubbled through the blood in his throat. "You think this ends with a trial? You think the people who sent Vance will allow any of this to become public? You're a naive ghost, just like your father. The name. I want the name of the person who gave Vance her orders. The person at the top of this conspiracy." Resnick's body was going limp, his struggles weakening as oxygen deprivation took its toll. But he managed one last, defiant smile. "Ask your admiral," he whispered. "Ask Harrison. He has been running this operation since before you were born." Admiral Harrison, commander of Naval Special Warfare, the man who had personally pinned on her trident, the man who had given the eulogy at her memorial service, the man who had ordered her father's death. Natasha felt Resnick go completely limp in her arms. Unconscious but alive, she released the chokehold and slumped against the tunnel wall, cradling her dislocated shoulder. Behind her, Elena Vance was trying to crawl toward the exit. Natasha did not have the strength to stop her, but she did not need to. A single shot rang out from the tunnel entrance. Vance screamed and collapsed, clutching a wound at her leg. Santana stepped into the flickering light, rifle raised, his expression carved from granite. "Sorry I am late, Ghost." He moved to secure Vance with zip ties. "The senior chief sent me to make sure you did not do anything stupid. Looks like I got here just in time." Natasha managed a weak smile. "I had it under control." "Sure you did." Santana looked at Resnick's unconscious form, then at the blood covering nearly every surface of the chamber. "Completely under control. Can you walk?" Natasha pushed herself upright, fighting through waves of agony. "I can do more than walk. We have an extraction to catch. And after that, we bring down an admiral." The processing building was a war zone when Natasha and Santana emerged from the tunnels, dragging their prisoners behind them. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness in staccato bursts as Marcus and the remaining team members held off Resnick's forces from rapidly deteriorating cover positions. Frost spotted them first. "Ghost is back. She's got Resnick." The announcement sent a visible ripple through the defenders. Riot let out a whoop despite his wounds. Even Marcus allowed himself a grim smile before returning his attention to the hostiles still pressing their assault. "Extraction is 11 minutes out," he called over the gunfire. "Can you secure the prisoners?" Natasha shoved Resnick's unconscious form behind a concrete barrier and zip-tied his wrists to a rusted pipe. Vance was already secured, her wounded leg making escape impossible even if she managed to free herself. "They are not going anywhere." Natasha retrieved a rifle from a fallen enemy and moved to reinforce the eastern perimeter. "How many hostiles remaining?" "Best estimate, 15 to 20. They have been throwing themselves at us for the past 10 minutes. Desperate. Marcus changed magazines without looking, his hands moving through the practiced motions with mechanical precision. "Something changed after you went into those tunnels. They stopped being tactical and started being suicidal. They know Resnick is down." Natasha sighted through her scope and dropped a hostile who had been trying to flank their position. Without him, they have no leadership, no purpose. They are fighting because they do not know what else to do. Then let us give them a reason to stop. She moved through the ruined building like a force of nature, her injuries forgotten in the heat of combat. Every shot found its target. Every movement flowed into the next with the fluid grace of someone who had been fighting since before she could read. The remaining hostiles began to falter, their aggression bleeding away as they realized that the ghost they had been sent to kill was very much alive and very much angry. Santana fell in beside her, covering her blind spots, anticipating her movements the way he had been trained to do years ago. They worked as a single unit, teacher and student reunited in the dance of violence that had defined both their lives. Frost reported from his position near the prisoners. "Vance is trying to negotiate. Says she has information about other moles, other operations. Wants to cut a deal. Tell her she can negotiate with the tribunal, Marcus replied. We are not in the business of making deals with traitors. The gunfire was becoming sporadic now. Resnick's forces were breaking, scattering into the darkness rather than continuing a fight they could not win. Within minutes, the facility had gone quiet except for the distant thrum of approaching helicopters. That is our ride, Wright announced. 2 Blackhawks, coming in hot from the southwest. ETA 4 minutes. Get the prisoners ready for transport. Marcus moved to Natasha's position, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. You look terrible. You should see the other guy. Natasha winced as she shifted her weight off her injured leg. Resnick gave up the name before I put him down. Admiral Harrison. He is the one who has been running this entire operation. Harrison. Marcus's face went pale. I served under him for 6 years. He gave a speech at your memorial. He looked me in the eye and told me what a hero you were. He also ordered my father's murder 20 years ago, and he has been using Vance to feed intelligence to the Russians ever since. Every operation we have lost, every team that has gone dark in hostile territory, it all traces back to him. The implications were staggering. Admiral Harrison was not just a commanding officer. He was a legend in the special operations community, a man whose name was synonymous with integrity and sacrifice. If he had been compromised all along, the damage to national security was incalculable. The helicopters appeared over the horizon, their running lights blinking against the pre-dawn sky. Marcus watched them approach and felt the weight of the past 12 hours settling onto his shoulders. How do we prove it? Even with Resnick and Vance in custody, Harrison will deny everything. He has had 20 years to cover his tracks. Natasha reached into her tactical vest and produced a small hard drive, battered and bloodstained but intact. 3 years of evidence. Financial records, communication intercepts, testimony from assets I turned across 4 continents. Everything I gathered while I was dead, all pointing to a senior figure in naval special warfare. I did not have the name until tonight, but now I have the name and the proof. Marcus stared at the drive. You have been carrying this the entire time. I made copies, hidden in places Harrison will never find. But this is the original, the complete file, enough to bring down an admiral and everyone who helped him. The first Blackhawk touched down 50 meters from their position, its rotors kicking up clouds of dust and debris. The crew chief was already waving them forward, eager to extract and exfiltrate before any remaining hostiles could regroup. Frost and Santana hauled the prisoners toward the helicopter while Riot limped along with support from Marcus. Natasha hung back for a moment, surveying the ruined facility where so much blood had been spilled. 20 years she had waited for this. 20 years of hunting and hiding and learning to live as a ghost in a world that had forgotten her. And now, finally, she had everything she needed to bring down the man who had destroyed her family. Ghost. Marcus's voice cut through a reverie. Time to go home. Home. The word felt strange in her mouth. She had not had a home in 3 years, had not allowed herself to imagine one. But looking at her team, at the brothers who had fought beside her through the longest night of their lives, she realized that home had never been a place. It had always been them. She climbed into the helicopter and did not look back. The military hospital in Jordan was a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. Natasha had refused treatment until every member of her team had been seen first, standing guard over Resnick's sedated form with a borrowed pistol and eyes that dared anyone to challenge her. Frost finally cornered her in a supply closet, his expression brooking no argument. Dislocated shoulder, fractured forearm, at least 3 cracked ribs, and enough lacerations to make you look like you lost a fight with a paper shredder. He pointed to an empty gurney. Sit down and let me work or I will sedate you myself. She sat, while Frost reset her shoulder with a sickening pop that made her vision go white. Natasha ran through the next steps in her mind. Harrison would already know that the Syria operation had failed. He would be scrambling to cover his tracks, destroy evidence, eliminate anyone who could connect him to Resnick or Vance. They had maybe 48 hours before he succeeded. Marcus appeared in the doorway, freshly bandaged and holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Natasha and leaned against the wall. Riot is stable. Doctors say he will make a full recovery. Santana has a few new scars to brag about, but nothing serious. We got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. Natasha accepted the coffee with her good hand. We had training, and we had each other. Speaking of each other, Marcus's expression grew serious. We need to talk about what happens next. I made some calls while you were playing hard to get with Frost. Reached out to some people I trust at the Pentagon. People who are not in Harrison's pocket. And they're scared. Harrison has friends everywhere. 30 years of cultivating relationships, trading favors, building loyalty. Even with your evidence, taking him down is going to be like trying to kill a hydra. Cut off one head and 2 more appear. And we do not cut off one head. Natasha set down her coffee. We burn the whole thing at once. Public exposure. Congressional testimony. Everything laid out so clearly that even his friends cannot protect him without destroying themselves. That is treason. Against an admiral. Against the entire command structure. No, that is justice. For my father. For every operator who died because Harrison sold them out. For every mission that failed because the enemy knew we were coming. Natasha met his eyes with the cold determination that had earned her the name Ghost. I did not survive 3 years in shadows to let him walk away from this. Frost finished wrapping her ribs and stepped back. She's right, Marcus. I have been thinking about Aleppo, about all the things that did not add up, the way the enemy knew exactly where to hit us, the way extraction was delayed just long enough to make escape impossible. Someone was feeding them information in real time, and that someone answered to Harrison. Marcus ran a hand over his face. All right, we do this your way, but we do it smart. No cowboy moves, no solo operations. We go in together or not at all. Agreed. Over the next 36 hours, they built their case. Natasha's hard drive contained financial records showing payments from Russian intelligence routed through a dozen shell companies, all eventually landing in accounts controlled by Harrison's wife. Communication intercepts proved that Vance had been reporting directly to the admiral for over a decade. Testimony from turned assets confirmed that Harrison had personally ordered the elimination of at least 4 American operatives who had gotten too close to the truth. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Resnick woke up on the 2nd day, his wrists shackled to the hospital bed and armed guards stationed at every entrance. When Natasha entered his room, he actually smiled. "You look better than the last time I saw you," he said through swollen lips. "Although I suppose that is not difficult, given that I was unconscious. I need to testify. Against Harrison. On record." Resnick laughed, a dry, rattling sound that dissolved into a cough. "And why would I do that? Harrison is finished whether I speak or not. Your evidence will see to that. My testimony adds nothing. It adds context. It adds weight. And it guarantees that he spends the rest of his life in a cell instead of cutting a deal for early release." The Russian studied her for a long moment. His eyes, still sharp despite his injuries, seemed to be calculating odds that only he could see. "Your father. He said something to me before he died. Something I have never forgotten." Natasha felt her heart clench. "What did he say?" "He said that the truth always surfaces. That no secret can stay buried forever. That one day, someone would come for the men who destroyed him." Resnick's smile faded. "I thought he was just a dying man grasping at hope. But here you are, 20 years later, proving him right. Will you testify?" Another long pause. Then, slowly, Resnick nodded. "I will testify. Not for you. Not for justice. But because your father deserved a better ending than the one I gave him. Consider it my penance." Natasha stood and walked to the door. When she turned back, her expression was unreadable. "Penance requires remorse. I do not think you are capable of that." "Perhaps not." Resnick closed his eyes. "But I am capable of honesty. And the honest truth is that Harrison is more of a monster than I ever was. He betrayed his own people, his own country, for nothing more than money and power. At least I had the decency to serve my nation while I did terrible things. That does not make you a hero. No, it makes me a soldier. There's a difference. Natasha left without another word. But as she walked down the corridor toward where her team was waiting, she felt something shift inside her chest. The weight she had been carrying for 20 years was finally beginning to lift. They had the evidence. They had the testimony. They had everything they needed. Now it was time to go home and burn an admiral's legacy to the ground. The Pentagon was a fortress of marble and secrets, its endless corridors echoing with the footsteps of men and women who held the fate of nations in their hands. Natasha had walked these halls before, years ago, when she was still alive in the eyes of the world. Back then, she had worn her dress uniform with pride, believing in the institution it represented. Now she walked them as a ghost made flesh, escorted by 4 members of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and flanked by the brothers who had refused to let her face this moment alone. Marcus was on her right, his jaw set in the grim expression he always wore before combat. Santana walked on her left, his eyes scanning every doorway and intersection with the hypervigilance of a man who had learned not to trust safe places. Frost and Wright brought up the rear, both still bearing visible signs of their Syrian ordeal, but refusing to be left behind. The hearing room was smaller than Natasha had expected. A long table dominated the space, occupied by 7 senior officials whose faces ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. At the far end sat Admiral William Harrison, his silver eagles gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He looked older than his official photograph suggested. The years had softened his features, adding weight to his jowls and gray to his temples. But his eyes were the same cold blue that Natasha remembered from her commissioning ceremony, when he had shaken her hand and told her she was a credit to the Navy. Those same eyes now fixed on her with undisguised hatred. Chief Petty Officer Volkov, the chairman of the review board, a stern-faced woman with Army stars on her shoulders, consulted her notes. You have been officially listed as killed in action for 3 years. Your sudden resurrection has created significant administrative challenges. I apologize for the inconvenience, General. A ghost of a smile crossed the chairman's face. I'm sure you do. Now then, you have made some extraordinary allegations against Admiral Harrison. Allegations of treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and collaboration with foreign intelligence services. These are not charges we take lightly, nor should you. Natasha stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the table. Before you is a summary of evidence gathered over 3 years of independent investigation. Financial records showing payments from Russian intelligence to accounts controlled by the Admiral's wife. Communication intercepts proving that Captain Elena Vance, currently in custody, reported directly to Admiral Harrison for over a decade. Testimony from foreign assets confirming that the Admiral personally ordered the elimination of American operatives. Harrison leaned forward. This is absurd. I have served this nation for 34 years. I have bled for this country. And now I am expected to sit here while a woman who faked her own death hurls accusations based on forged documents and the testimony of enemy combatants? The documents are not forged. Marcus spoke for the first time, his deep voice cutting through Harrison's bluster. I have personally reviewed every piece of evidence. I have cross-referenced the financial data with official records. Everything checks out. And who are you to make such determinations? Harrison's contempt was palpable. A senior chief who has spent more time in war zones than in classrooms? You do not have the expertise to evaluate intelligence of this complexity. No, but I do. The voice came from the doorway. Every head turned as a tall woman in civilian clothes entered the room, her credentials identifying her as a senior analyst with the Central Intelligence Agency. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I have spent the last 18 months investigating a suspected mole within Naval Special Warfare Command. My investigation led me to the same conclusion that Chief Volkov reached independently. Admiral Harrison has been compromised since at least 2003. Harrison's face went pale. This is a setup, a conspiracy against me. The conspiracy is yours, Admiral. Dr. Chun placed her own folder on the table. I have confirmation from Allied Intelligence Services that Viktor Reznik received advance notice of at least 12 joint operations over the past decade. Every single one of those operations was personally briefed to Admiral Harrison before execution. The leak always originated from the same source. The room had gone silent. The board members were staring at their papers, at the evidence piling up, at the man they had trusted for 3 decades. Natasha took a step toward Harrison. 20 years ago, you gave the order that killed my father. He was trying to come in from the cold, to share what he knew about Russian penetration of American intelligence. You could not let that happen, because you were the penetration he was trying to expose. Harrison said nothing. His hands had begun to tremble. Last month, you sent my team into a trap designed to eliminate the last people who might connect you to Reznik. When that failed, you activated Captain Vance to finish the job personally. Natasha's voice was steady, each word landing like a hammer blow. How many operators have died because of you? How many missions have failed? How many families have buried empty coffins because you sold our secrets to the enemy? Still, Harrison remained silent, but his eyes told the story his mouth refused to speak. The eyes of a man watching his entire world collapse. General, Marcus addressed the chairman. We request that Admiral Harrison be taken into custody pending formal charges. We also request protective details for all members of SEAL Team Bravo until we can confirm that all of Harrison's assets have been neutralized. The chairman looked at the evidence spread across the table. She looked at the CIA analyst, at the battered operators who had survived Syria, at the woman who had come back from the dead to deliver justice. Then she looked at Admiral Harrison. Security, she said quietly. Take the Admiral into custody. As the MPs moved to comply, Harrison finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, but in the silent room it carried to every corner. You have no idea what you have done, Ghost. The people I work for, they will not stop because I am in chains. This is bigger than one admiral, bigger than one operation. You have not won. You have just made yourself a target. Natasha watched them lead him away. Her father's murderer, finally brought to justice after 2 decades of hiding in plain sight. I have always been a target, she said to the empty air. The difference is, now I'm shooting back. 1 month later, the ceremony took place on a cloudless Virginia morning. The sun hung low over the parade ground at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, casting long shadows across rows of white chairs filled with dress uniforms and press suits. Flags snapped in the breeze, and somewhere beyond the perimeter, news cameras captured every moment for a nation hungry to understand how one of its highest-ranking officers had betrayed everything he had sworn to protect. Natasha stood at attention before the assembled crowd, her dress blues immaculate despite the arm still held in a sling. The bruises had faded. The cuts had healed to thin white lines that would eventually become just more entries in the map of scars covering her body. But the weight in her chest, the burden she had carried for 20 years, that had finally lifted. The Secretary of the Navy read the citation in a voice that carried across the silent assembly. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty, Chief Petty Officer Natasha Volkov distinguished herself through extraordinary heroism while engaged in combat operations against enemy forces in Syria. Despite suffering severe injuries, Chief Volkov single-handedly eliminated over 24 enemy combatants, rescued her teammates from certain death, and captured a high-value target whose testimony exposed a decades-long espionage operation within Naval Special Warfare Command. The medal was heavy in the Secretary's hands as he pinned it to her chest. The Medal of Honor, the highest recognition the nation could bestow. Natasha felt nothing, or rather, she felt everything. The pride and the grief and the exhaustion and the strange, hollow sensation of finally reaching the end of a journey that had consumed her entire adult life. She thought of her father, of the way he used to smile when she hit the center of the target, of the stories he told about a homeland she barely remembered. She thought of the cold forest where he had died, of the promise she had made to his memory. I got him, Papa. I got them all. The applause washed over her like a wave. She shook hands she would not remember, accepted congratulations that blurred together into a single stream of noise. And then, finally she was free. Her team was waiting for her at the edge of the parade ground. Marcus had tears in his eyes that he would later deny. Santana was grinning like a fool, his arm around Riot, who had made a full recovery and would not shut up about it. Frost stood slightly apart, his expression unreadable, but when Natasha approached him, he pulled her into a hug so tight it made her cracked ribs ache. "You deserve this," he said quietly. "More than anyone I have ever known. We all deserve this." Natasha pulled back and looked at each of them in turn. "I cannot have done any of it without you. None of it. You carried me when I was dead to the world. You brought me back to life." Marcus cleared his throat. Speaking of which, he reached into his pocket and produced a familiar set of dog tags. "I believe these belong to you." Natasha took them with trembling fingers. Her tags, the ones she had been wearing when the building collapsed in Aleppo. The ones Marcus had worn for 3 years as a memorial. "You kept them. Every day." He smiled. "Told myself I was holding on to them until I could give them back. Guess I was right to wait." The reception that followed was held at a small restaurant near the base, bought out for the evening by someone with enough pull to keep the press at bay. The team gathered around a long table laden with food and drink, sharing stories that range from classified to ridiculous to both at once. Santana raised his glass. To Ghost. He had abandoned his usual cockiness for something softer, more genuine. "The best teacher I ever had. The best shooter I ever saw. And the scariest woman I have ever met." Laughter rippled around the table. Natasha shook her head, fighting a smile. To the team, she countered. To the men who held the line when everything went wrong. To the family I thought I had lost. They drank. And then Riot, because he could never leave well enough alone, leaned forward with a gleam in his eye. "So, Ghost, now that you are officially undead and decorated, what is next? Retirement? Book deal? Reality television?" Natasha considered the question. For 3 years, she had lived with a singular purpose. Hunt Resnick, expose Harrison, avenge her father. Now that purpose had been fulfilled, and the future stretched before her like an uncharted ocean. "I was thinking," she said slowly, "that I might take some time off. Learn how to be a person again. Maybe visit Odessa. See if any of my family is still there. And after that, she looked around the table at the men who had become her brothers. "I was hoping there might be a spot on the team for a washed-up sniper with trust issues and a bad attitude." Marcus laughed. "I think we can find room." The evening stretched on, filled with the warmth of shared survival and the quiet joy of reunion. Outside, the world continued to turn. Admiral Harrison awaited trial in a maximum security facility. Captain Vance had cut a deal and was providing names that would keep investigators busy for years. The conspiracy Harrison had warned about was being dismantled piece by piece, its architects exposed to the harsh light of accountability. But in that small restaurant, surrounded by the only family she had left, Natasha Volkov allowed herself to simply exist. No mischance, no targets, no vengeance driving her forward. Just peace, hard-won and long delayed, but finally beautifully real. If this story moved you, drop a comment about your favorite moment, or tell us if you know someone whose courage brought them back from the impossible. The SEALs might be fiction, but the sacrifice and brotherhood they represent is very real. Frost caught her eye from across the table. "You look different," he said. "Lighter somehow." Natasha touched the metal on her chest, then the crucifix beneath her uniform, then the dog tags hanging once again around her neck. "I feel lighter," she admitted. "For the first time in 20 years, I am not carrying ghosts anymore." Marcus raised his glass one final time. "To coming home." Around the table, 5 voices answered as one. "To coming home."